His eyes would kind of glaze over, his mouth would move, but he wouldn't be saying anything.
I felt that this is ridiculous. I mean, it's in our mind, you know. It's got to be in our mind.
He thinks I'm crazy.
It's so underdiagnosed, I can't even begin. You feel like just screaming sometimes.
I could have checked out. I just thought, I don't want to live anymore.
Next, 3 medical mysteries that defied the experts. Almost from the moment he was born, Eamonn Murphy's mother knew that something was terribly wrong, and no one could help her.
Why can't Eamonn do this? Why can't Eamonn do that? Why is he not speaking?
Robyn Tully's life was plagued by dangerous episodes that threatened to kill her and others.
I just said, please, 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 I need medicine, I need medicine, I need medicine.
Pamela Reese had a wonderful marriage and a loving family. Then a mysterious illness shattered her perfect world.
There was no belief. I mean, you know, when you feel terrible and somebody doesn't believe you, you don't have a relationship.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery. In 1996, the Murphy family was excited by the prospect of a new baby.
What should we call the girl if it's a girl?
Catherine.
We ended up having this adorable little baby boy, Eamonn, and he was born July 2nd, 96.
Eamonn
Charles Murphy. And he's our little baby.
Everyone in my family thought it was going to be a girl, but Eamonn obviously didn't come out as a girl.
Oh, you're a beautiful little boy. Someone once remarked that our kids look like they come from the same catalog, and Eamonn fit right in there with them.
But 3 months later, Lisa noticed something was wrong with Eamonn.
At that age, babies, their eyes typically track, and he wasn't. And I remember just being hysterical because I thought, you know what, I don't think he can see. So I took him to a doctor, and I remember while the physician was doing all these little eye tests with him, he accidentally dropped one of his instruments, and it hit the metal chair and made this unbelievable loud sound. And Eamonn never flinched. And he kind of joked with me. He said, "Are you really here for his eyes, or do you think maybe his hearing? Maybe he can't hear?"
Lisa was upset, but I wasn't that concerned about his health. I feel every kid is different. Every kid develops differently.
Eamonn's hearing was eventually tested, and the results were normal.
I was happy to hear that, but I thought, you know what? I really want an answer. I'm going to find out. There's got to be something. There's something more than, more to this than meets the eye.
Frustrated with Eamonn's doctors, Lisa began to look elsewhere for help.
My sister-in-law, Marjorie, is a physical therapist, and she would have discussions with my wife, Lisa, and they would talk about, where Eamonn is and where he should be.
I really noticed that there were problems when Eamonn was a year at his first birthday party. And Lisa had said to me, when he's eating the solid food, he wasn't chewing well.
He would cram all of the cupcake in his mouth, but it would get so packed. I mean, he would just pack it, and then he wouldn't chew, and then he would end up, he'd open his mouth, and half of it would fall out again.
And there was kind of a deadness to the area around his lips and inside his mouth that we definitely took note of. Hi, Aim.
And I thought, something's strange about this. Something's amiss here.
The doctors were saying to her, just give it time, give it time, give it time. But she wasn't reassured by that. And she was persistent about trying to find out what was wrong with Eamonn.
For the next year and a half, Eamonn kept missing developmental milestones. He was slow to walk and talk.
We realized he definitely was not where he should be. We were looking for an answer, and we weren't getting it.
I mean, it's just a crucial time. It's those first 3 years, as far as developmentally, it's the most important years.
Eamonn turned 3 in 1999, and despite his setbacks, it was now time for him to start nursery school.
When all my other kids went off to nursery school, it was such a joyful time, and it was fun, and it was happy.
And when he went into school, it was tough because we saw really how far behind he was, and it became more apparent to both Lisa and I.
He should have been able to do whatever me, my brother, and my sister did, but I guess I just knew that he wouldn't have that opportunity. He would have to work even harder than we did to fit in normally.
The first several months, half the year, we didn't see much improvement in Eamonn.
Eamonn's developmental problems had Lisa scared, but then she noticed something new that absolutely terrified her.
When Eamonn was 3.5, I noticed he'd be playing in the family room, and then he would be in the middle of like a little make-believe game, you know, with his little soldiers or whatever, and he would stop, and his eyes would kind of glaze over, his mouth would move, but he wouldn't be saying anything.
He would kind of rock back and forth and make this sound from the back of his throat. He was spacing out, basically.
You could go up in front of him and wave your hand at him, and he was not really responding. And it was almost like he was having a conversation with himself.
I was the one who probably saw most of these episodes. You know, I'd tell the doctors they never witnessed anything. And I remember my sister-in-law Marjorie saying,
"Why don't you videotape it? This way you have it documented what's going on and let the doctors look at it."
A week later, the whole family was driving in the car, and Lisa was ready.
All of a sudden, I hear this clicking noise in the back seat. So I thought, this is my chance. I turned around and I started filming Eamonn from the back seat.
He was looking out the window, and his mouth was moving, and his eyes had a kind of a vacant look.
And I'm talking to him, calling his name, and I actually had to reach over and pat his knee. And then all of a sudden, he snaps to, he kind of looks in my direction, and then he gives this big smile for the camera.
Are you okay?
I watched the tape, and it was distressing. That was the first time I had really seen it, and shook me up.
Eamonn Murphy was an adorable 3-year-old with a loving family. But despite all the attention, Eamonn was in a downward spiral. At 1, he had problems eating. At 2, he wasn't talking. And now he's having trance-like episodes that no one can explain.
These things are getting worse and worse. I'm kind of at my wit's end. This is it. I really need to find out what's going on with him.
Armed with a videotape of Eamonn's episodes, Lisa visited a pediatric neurologist.
He was looking at the tapes and looking at his records, and he felt that Eamonn may have some type of seizure disorder.
We ran a few tests, and he said, I think, you know, they're partial complex seizures, and I think that we should put him on some anti-seizure medication.
But many seizure medications are powerful drugs with serious side effects.
And I thought, you know, should I be giving him this medication? I mean, this would have been like the easy way out. Just start him on the medication and see what happens and hope for the best. But I just didn't feel good about it.
She just had a gut feeling that, you know, we're not going to medicate Eamonn until we really know what's causing these seizures.
After 4 years of searching, Lisa still didn't feel any closer to the truth, but she kept on looking for clues.
I read this article on parents putting their children on gluten-free and casein-free diets.
This rang a bell. Lisa herself was on a gluten-free diet because she had been diagnosed with something called celiac disease.
Basically, it's the inability to digest gluten. Gluten is a protein that's found in wheat, rye, barley, and oats.
She was addicted to pretzels and cornflakes, and she would eat them all the time but she was getting really, really thin, and she was getting really sick.
When I was diagnosed with celiac disease, that was the first question to my doctor. I said, what about my children? And I remember my doctor just kind of laughing and saying, oh, forget it. You know, celiac disease is so rare. Your kids, and even if your kids do get it, you'll know immediately because they'll have the exact same GI symptoms that you've experienced.
Eamonn had none of the digestion problems that Lisa suffered from, so the idea that they might share the same disease seemed far-fetched. But then Lisa learned some shocking news.
I attended a Westchester Celiac Support Group meeting. Dr. Peter Green was going to be speaking, and I was very, very interested in what he had to say on celiac disease.
Physicians in this country, at least, are taught that celiac disease is a rare condition. It's actually very common. It occurs in about 1% of the population, and it actually occurs in families.
Peter Green kept stressing how important it was to have all first-degree relatives tested. I remember just freezing in my seat thinking, it's genetic?
Desperate for answers, Lisa approached Dr. Green and asked him what she should do.
She was totally unaware that there could be an impact of this on her family. We were running a family screening study looking at at-risk individuals.
I was immediately of the opinion, when can we do it? Let's do it now.
So we drew blood on Lisa's children as part of this study.
In celiac disease, gluten destroys the tiny finger-like protrusions in the small intestine, called villi, that help the body absorb nutrients. Sufferers usually experience stomach aches and other GI symptoms, not the strange trances that have been plaguing Eamonn. Still, Lisa began to wonder, could malnutrition be at the root of Eamonn's problems?
I'm kind of on pins and needles because I just don't really know what's in store for me and what's going to happen.
3 weeks after their meeting, Dr. Green completed the first set of tests.
Eamonn's results were very high, indicating that it was virtually 100% chance that he had celiac disease.
An endoscopy confirmed the diagnosis.
And I remember just hugging Bob, and I started to cry, of course. And I thought, thank God, this is over with. It's done. This is it. We finally solved the mystery.
Looking back, Lisa was horrified by the cost of her ignorance.
You know, as a mom, you want to give your kids the best nutritional foods available. And I remember giving Eamonn whole grains and cereals, and it's just, in essence, I was actually poisoning Eamonn. I was giving him poison.
After the diagnosis, Lisa quickly placed Eamonn on a diet free of wheat and all other gluten-filled foods. It was a huge life change, but the results were striking.
It's getting harder and harder in this day and age to take wheat out of what you eat because they tend to put it in many things. But it's a condition that you actually don't need to take any medication for and has the potential to totally reverse with changing your diet.
After Eamonn went on a gluten-free diet, the seizures stopped almost immediately.
He just came to life. His eyes sparkled, he was alert. It was incredible.
If he hadn't got a diagnosis of celiac disease, it's easy to imagine that he could have progressed rapidly even further. So 4 years later, one would think that he just might become totally incapacitated.
Picture eating food and not absorbing any of the vitamins. And that's what this does. So the potential is limitless in terms of what it could do to him.
At a critical point in his development, celiac had robbed Eamonn's brain of nutrients, causing cognitive delays and seizures. But why had it taken 4 years to get diagnosed?
Eamonn had an atypical presentation. Typically, celiac disease, the way it's taught, is that it's a diarrhea-predominant illness.
There's no, bloated stomach, no distended abdomen, nothing.
his clinical presentation didn't trigger any connection to the disease.
It's so underdiagnosed, I can't even begin. You feel like just screaming sometimes.
Eamonn is 8 today, and he's absolutely fabulous. He's so cute, and he's so spunky.
No one would look at Eamonn and say there's anything different about him than any other 8-year-old.
He's getting hundreds on his math tests and spelling tests every week without fail.
He's doing great. Doing great.
No one knows your child better than you do. I mean, a physician, they know the diseases, they know how to prescribe medicines, but they really also have to listen to what the mother's saying about a child. They have to put, it's like a puzzle, they have to put all the pieces together.
Eamonn Murphy had his parents looking out for him. But for Pamela Reese, the journey to diagnosis would be full of pain and heartache. It all began with a blackout.
When I was 19 in college, I fainted. I came out of a meal and fainted on the street, which was, a bit alarming and scary.
Rattled and perplexed, Pamela immediately went to the infirmary.
I was told I was hypoglycemic and maybe I wasn't eating properly. College kids skip meals and stuff, so I kind of attributed it to that. I had a boyfriend, and he used to carry nuts and beef jerky and protein. So if I started to feel dizzy, he would just hand me some protein.
Pamela thought she was suffering from low blood sugar. But for the next 7 years, the dizzy spells continued, accompanied by a crippling fatigue.
I would just crash. I mean, really crash to the point of having to lay in bed for an hour or two and feel like I was in a semi-conscious state. There was never really a diagnosis for that. It was a little confusing to me, and I think others, because I always looked so fit. I was an athlete. I always had a lot of energy. I was very, very hyper, so I think people started to not really believe me.
In 1989, Pamela met Englishman Clive Ongley.
She was a very, very spunky, very up person, had a lot of energy, very intelligent, very bright, very beautiful.
When I met Clive, I was actually feeling pretty good. I have these periods, if I look back, periods of feeling better and worse.
They married in 1991 and moved to Tokyo. Pam thought perhaps the sickly period of her life was over, but right away her symptoms flared up.
First night, it was very hot. It was August, and we got into the hotel and went out for dinner.
All of a sudden, she just fainted.
I remember coming to on the street and this look of terror. And it's like he just gets married to his beautiful, healthy bride and happy as can be, and 2 days later, she's passed out in a foreign country.
Fortunately, there was a doctor on attendance at the hotel.
He did an EKG, said the EKG was fine.
He didn't think it was anything to worry about.
He gave me some antibiotics, said, must have been a virus.
And, life continued as normal.
I got pregnant, and it was funny because I suddenly felt better than I'd ever felt in my life. I felt healthy and really strong.
It was a wonderful time for us. We were both very excited.
Pregnant and feeling great, Pamela began to forget that she had ever been sick.
You can't help but think, okay, you outgrow things, and maybe things are in your mind, and now I'm in love and married, and I had always wanted a child. But I had this feeling that something was wrong.
9 months later, Clive and Pam's son Sean was born. It should have been a glorious time for the young couple, but Pam's life was about to take a drastic turn. While Pamela Reese was pregnant with her first child, the debilitating fatigue and dizziness that had haunted her since college mysteriously disappeared. But almost immediately after her son was born, the symptoms returned, with a vengeance.
My legs were really bothering me. I started getting muscle twitching in my muscles in my legs.
Her bones ached and her knee ached and her back ached and her elbow ached. And for a woman that was young, she seemed to be in bad shape.
She didn't know what was wrong with her. And she said, "This is really scary, Deborah."
In 1992, Clive and Pam packed up their young son and moved to England. She hoped that maybe English doctors would be able to solve the mystery of her strange, ongoing symptoms.
I'd always would go to internists and kind of general practitioners, but I started to branch out into different, categories. I'd go to a rheumatologist or neurologist, psychologist, endocrinologist. They take blood. My blood always was fine. They would, look in your mouth and nose. They'd listen to my heart. Nobody ever heard anything. They would send me home with some more antibiotics. It became frustrating for me because I think the doctors thought I was crazy and it was in my mind, and I was a hypochondriac.
The people around Pam started to doubt her as well.
As these ailments persisted, I found myself doing the cleaning and the cooking and the washing and the taking care of Sean, which I didn't mind. But as time went on, I felt that she was just being lazy.
No one was believing her. Her husband didn't believe her, doctors didn't believe her.
Because I look good. If I had another person tell me how good I looked, I was going to puke.
Then, just when things were getting unbearable for Pamela, she got pregnant. And again, miraculously, it was as if she had never been sick.
When you're pregnant, you're supposed to be more hormonal, and more moody, but I actually felt much more awake and alive.
In September of 1995, Pamela gave birth to a daughter, Sasha. But just like before, once she was no longer pregnant, her medical problems returned.
Things really started to escalate for me, health-wise. My legs were hurting so much. At this point, I couldn't walk, and nobody could explain it.
She called me on the phone. "I'm in tears. I can't stand the pain."
The doctors just said it's stress, but I didn't believe them, and I thought there was something wrong.
In 1995, Clive and Pamela thought that maybe a change of climate would help her health, so they moved to California. But soon after they arrived, Pamela hit a new low.
It got to the point where I was in bed at 2 o'clock for the rest of the day, and my legs were aching.
Physically, it was a roller coaster. She was up, she was down. I just couldn't understand why, she was always sick. I felt that it's in her mind, It's got to be in her mind.
Eventually, Clive stopped taking Pamela seriously about what she was going through, and finally just tuned out her illness altogether.
He really was just kind of disassociating himself from it, which of course didn't help our marriage.
In 2002, after 12 years of marriage, Pamela and Clive divorced. Within a matter of days, Pamela hit rock bottom.
I was starting to feel very alone, suffering a lot more, and scared.
The pain in her legs was so severe that she could not even stand up for more than 2 minutes. We would be out, and she'd say, "I've got to sit down."
I just remember sitting in the shower, just crying hysterically. Every muscle in my body would hurt. I was in such pain. I felt like I was dying. I certainly couldn't function. I got to the point where I could have checked out. I just thought, I don't want to live anymore.
Since her late teens, Pamela Reese struggled to find out what was causing her fatigue, muscle pain, and shortness of breath. Now, at 43 and without hope, she is on the brink of suicide.
I'm always so strong underneath my illness that I could always push and push and push. And this was when I was getting to a point where I couldn't push anymore.
Then, one night, Pamela had a dream.
In this dream, there's an outline of my torso from the back, and the only thing you saw in the torso was the heart beating. And then I heard these voices that said, "It's your heart." And I woke up and I sat up, and it suddenly all came together. I went right to the phone book and looked up cardiologist.
Pamela called Dr. Alejandro Garcia, a cardiovascular disease specialist.
Pamela came to my office as a self-referred patient. She thought that she may have a heart condition that might explain her symptoms.
She told Dr. Garcia about her years of dizziness, fatigue, and pain.
Basically, I said, look, I know I look fine, and I act fine, and my blood tests will be fine, and my EKGs will be fine, but I'm not fine. Please believe me, I'm not fine. He said, all right, let's run tests. Let's do it.
She needed that. She needed to hear someone say, I believe you, Pamela.
I was so relieved that there was a doctor that believed me, someone that, didn't think you were making it up. It would help you search.
Placing a stethoscope on Pamela's chest, Dr. Garcia heard something that all the other doctors had missed.
I discovered an abnormal heart sound. It's called a click. She also had a small murmur following this abnormal heart sound.
To confirm the click he'd heard, Dr. Garcia ordered an echocardiogram to get a better picture of Pamela's heart.
As soon as we started the echocardiogram, we found some abnormalities in her mitral valve that pointed towards the diagnosis of mitral prolapse.
The technical stuff started coming, but I didn't even really hear. All I heard was like, there's something wrong with my heart.
After 25 years of pain and uncertainty, Pamela finally had an answer. Dr. Garcia told her that she had mitral valve prolapse syndrome, or MVP, a heart disorder where the mitral valve does not close properly. With each beat, blood backs up in the heart, reducing oxygen flow to the cells of the body. When Pamela was pregnant, her blood volume was higher, and the extra oxygen caused her symptoms to temporarily disappear.
When I first got the diagnosis, I called Clive.
I was amazed and just relieved for her. Finally, she'd found what had been troubling her for such a long time. Sadly, it came a little too late for us.
He kind of realized that how much it had affected not only who I am, but our relationship.
I think it's been able to open the door for them to be good friends and for them to have forgiveness for each other.
It's estimated that, like Pamela, about 1.5 million Americans suffer from mitral valve prolapse syndrome. There is no cure, but with medication, the symptoms can be alleviated.
The first 9 days, it wasn't doing anything, and I was pissed. But then about the 10th day, I took the medicine, and I suddenly, my legs felt a bit better, and I thought, I feel a little better. Let's try and go for a walk.
So we went on this 3-mile hike, and I was struggling to keep up with her. She didn't want to stop. She just felt so much better and happier, and it made me happier.
I still get the symptoms. They're not as severe. They're not as often. I like knowing what's happening. I like knowing that there's things I can do. I like knowing there's things that I shouldn't do. It's empowering.
When I saw her in the follow-up visit after 2 weeks of treatment, my first impression is that I was seeing a totally different person, much calmer than before, more confident, and really with a totally changing in attitude about her life.
It took a lot of trust in my intuition to not accept that label of being a hypochondriac, of it being all in your mind.
When my mom walks in, she looks very healthy and young. Doctors automatically think there's nothing wrong with her. Maybe I'll be a doctor and I'll make sure not to make that mistake.
In her quest for a diagnosis, Pamela Reese told everyone who would listen about her symptoms. But for Robyn Tully, illness was a private affair that quietly spiraled out of control. In 1962, Sharon and Joel Comato welcomed their daughter Robyn into the world. She was all that her parents had hoped for and more. But one night, when she was just over a year old, Robyn suffered violent convulsions.
My husband and I were sitting in the living room, and we heard a noise. And we both ran into the bedroom and looked into the crib. And Robyn was lying on her back. Her head was back, and her eyes looked like they had rolled back in her head. and there were slight tremors in her body.
Her parents rushed her to the emergency room.
And they came out and they said she needs to have a spinal tap. I said, just tell me, will my daughter live? And they said, we don't know.
Sharon wasn't sure she would ever see Robyn alive again, but the next morning brought surprisingly good news.
They said, look, she has the croup. Isn't that wonderful? This is what it is.
Croup is a common infection of the upper airway, usually accompanied by a high fever, and is easily treated.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is so great. You know, it's just the croup, because I'm looking around the room at all these very, very ill children, and I'm thinking how fortunate I am.
The crisis was over, but because of the severity of Robyn's episode, the doctors continued to monitor her.
I had to take her for EEGs every 3 months for a year, and they just said everything was fine. Regardless of what they said, I knew something wasn't right. I watched her very carefully. She was happy, she played, she did all the normal things that kids do. But I had a lot of suspicion. I was waiting for something to happen.
When Robyn started to attend nursery school, her mother's fears turned into reality.
I would get this bad feeling in my stomach, bad taste in my mouth, a feeling like I felt this before. And I remember telling my parents when I was at school, it didn't feel good.
Because she was so young, Robyn had a hard time describing her episodes to her family. Then, one night at dinner, she came up with a name for them.
I was 7 years old. We would go for Chinese food. That was one of our favorite places to go. And at the end of our dinners, we would have cookies for dessert. And when I would bite into that cookie, the taste that I had reminded me so much of the bad taste in my mouth, bad feeling in my stomach. That's when I came up with a name for it.
And she said, this is Aunt Cookie. And apparently that's what Aunt Cookie tasted like.
Robyn's Aunt Cookies were preceded by an almond taste in her mouth, followed by a stomachache and a sense of déjà vu. The symptoms were very real, but the name added a sense of make-believe.
Whatever Robyn said, you know, everyone took note of it, but we really couldn't understand it.
And of course, there was a lot of curiosity. Robyn, tell me about Aunt Cookie. And we explored, but we didn't really get answers. And I took the children to a new pediatrician, and they asked for a health history. And I couldn't wait to tell them, my daughter had this episode, and I think this is what it was, but we don't really know. And actually, there was no response. There was no probing for questions. I might as well have been talking about her height and weight.
So Robyn and her family went on as if her episodes were nothing to be concerned about. But they weren't going away.
I'd have them maybe 2 or 3 times a year. I might have them at a birthday party because it seems like loud noises triggered them. I would mutter or mumble, and I remember sometimes friends saying to me, "What did you say?" And I'd be like, "Oh, nothing."
Embarrassed by her behavior, Robyn withdrew, only confiding in her closest friend.
They used to happen when we were talking about something sensitive. Something that maybe would upset her. I recall being at lunch with her one day and her eyes would kind of just zone out. And it took a little while till she came back.
When she was young, everyone just thought Robyn was different. But as she got older, the episodes became dangerous for Robyn and others.
I went to college and I was in the car making a right turn, and I had seen this house. And the next thing I know, I woke up and I'm on the lawn, and I said, "Oh my goodness, how did I get up here?"
She said as she was driving, lights were flashing in front of her. And we drove to get her, and then we took her to the emergency room. They didn't find anything. I guess it was a cursory exam. And they told us to take her to a neurologist and follow up, and we did.
Robyn thought maybe her Aunt Cookies had something to do with the car accident. She took a chance and confided in the neurologist.
I don't think the doctor was really getting the story. He understood the lights flashing, but he didn't understand Aunt Cookie.
And he says, have you ever thought about going to see a psychiatrist for your Aunt Cookies? And I felt, wow, he thinks I'm crazy.
They dismissed it as being mental. It's just so dismissive and invalidating.
And it took me a long time to ever want to go back to a doctor.
In her early 20s, Robyn tried to hide her strange episodes. But when she was 27 and pregnant with her first child, they became impossible to ignore.
And I might be holding a cup of tea, and I would be pouring the cup of tea on the floor. I'd have no memory of this. And I was so completely frightened and puzzled.
And when they started happening 10, 15 a day, I was alarmed.
And I wanted it to go away. After a while, I stopped telling people because I was just so embarrassed.
Then, at 35, after her second child was born, Robyn's condition took a drastic turn.
I would have my Aunt Cookie feeling, and just as I would get that stabbing pain in my stomach, I would know that I'd have to run to the bathroom. And there would be several times when, unfortunately, I didn't make it, and I would lose control of my bowels.
She's losing weight, she's having headaches. We're watching her waste away. I think she was under 100 pounds. And, you know, it's scary to see someone you love so much get, you know, really getting sick.
For as long as she can remember, Robyn Tully has suffered from bizarre episodes and altered states of consciousness. Embarrassed, she's kept them quiet from all but her closest friends. Now her condition has grown so dire that she has no choice but to seek medical help.
I said, I'm losing control of my bowels, and I've lost over 20 pounds. And he said, well, I think there's something wrong with your stomach because look how much weight you've lost. He ran a whole bunch of tests, and he said that I had Crohn's disease.
Crohn's is an inflammatory bowel disease. It can cause pain and chronic diarrhea.
As terrible as Crohn's disease can be, for me, not hearing the words, you're crazy, it felt better.
When they said Robyn had Crohn's, I didn't think that that was the answer. I'm not a doctor, but it just seemed unrelated.
The GI doctor gave me medicine for the Crohn's disease and told me it was supposed to help me gain weight and make me feel better. But it didn't. I was losing weight and I was still running to the bathroom.
But Robyn was not willing to give up. Instead, she went to yet another gastroenterologist.
And sure enough, it's not Crohn's. And I was like, that's good, but what is it? He goes, I'm not sure, but we're gonna figure this out. I want you to see a neurologist. I said, oh no, another doctor. But I said, okay, what choice do I have? And the next day I went to see Dr. Oren Davinsky.
I was in my NYU office, and Robyn came in to report that she was having episodes in which she would essentially blank out.
And I said, okay, I'm gonna tell you the strangest story you ever heard. I get this terrible feeling in my stomach, a very bad taste in my mouth, a feeling like every story I've ever heard, I've heard it before. And he said, like deja vu? And I said, yes, like deja vu.
So I asked her if she was ever known to have had a seizure with a high fever as a baby, and the answer was she did.
And he said, you're not crazy. I said, I'm not crazy? It's the first time a doctor ever said you're not crazy.
Somebody was looking back at her saying, right. It was all real and legitimate, and she could finally have somebody who would understand her.
And then he said, I'm gonna tell you something, and you don't have to be scared. We're gonna have to do tests first, but I feel that you have something called epilepsy. And I said, epilepsy? No, I can't be.
Epilepsy, unfortunately, has often carried for a lot of people a strong stigma, which luckily has been reduced in the past few decades, but remains there.
Epilepsy is a disorder that occurs when the brain discharges repeated abnormal electric impulses that attack motor and sensory functions. The impulses can lead to a wide variety of seizures, from violent convulsions typically associated with the disease to the subtle altered states of consciousness from which Robyn suffered.
I was 99% sure she had epilepsy coming from one of her temporal lobes. And indeed, an EEG was done that day that strongly supported the diagnosis.
I think my first words were tears out of my eyes because there was part of me that was so relieved and part of me that was so scared.
We were happy that it was finally that someone said, look, you know, this is what you have. Now, this is what you have. How are we going to fix it, or can we fix it?
We started her on one of the standard medications that were available at that point, and we did see stretches of seizure control.
At first, the medications seemed to help, but soon the seizures made a potentially deadly return.
And I'm pulling into the school and I see a woman pulling down her window and I pull mine down and I said, "Hi, do I know you?" And she said, "Do you know me? You just hit my car."
Diagnosed with epilepsy at age 40, Robyn Tully is relieved to finally know what she's been suffering from her entire life. But despite being on medication, the seizures have returned, and a car crash has left her stunned.
I knew in my heart, if I could have hurt any human being, especially a child, I couldn't live with myself. So we had to do something.
After the accident, Dr. Davinsky advised Robyn that surgery was her best option.
And I'm so scared. But you look in Dr. Davinsky's eyes, and he says to me, "If you were my sister, this is what I'd want you to do."
In June of 2003, Robyn Tully underwent brain surgery. 6 hours later, she woke up a new person.
Everybody, they were just so happy to see me and they wanted to have a conversation, but my words were difficult to get out.
I think the first thing that Robyn said to me after the surgery, I said, "How do you feel?" She goes, "I did it, Chatty, I did it."
Finally, after 42 years, Robyn was seizure-free. Her family was thrilled, but they wished that they'd been more aggressive with doctors sooner.
If you suspect something, if you're not satisfied, you have to ask the questions. And if you don't get the answers, you go somewhere else.
If things are not working, the medicine's not working, if the symptoms are continuing, they need to think that perhaps something else is going on and I need to advocate for myself.